I like to move it, move it. I like to move it, move it. You like to move it. I like to move it, move it. I like to move it, move it. I like to move it, move it. You like to move it. I like to.
Alrighty, let's get in here on this lesson for private pilot slow flight. Alrighty. So in private pilot slow flight, our objective is to develop the pilot's abilities to fly at a low speed and high angle of attack. Understand the aerodynamics associated with slow flight in various aircraft configurations and altitude. Recognize airplane cues in flight conditions. So, how does the airplane handle and how it reacts to our control inputs? Smoothly manage coordinated flight control inputs while maneuvering without a stall warning. So, keeping the plane coordinated during the flight, and as you're inputting controls, say you need to turn to a heading, 90-degree turn or something like that, or a climb or a descent, need to make sure we're staying coordinated. Abrupt maneuvers may end up sounding the stall warning, and then you'll have to recover from that. We'll go over a little bit about stalls during this lesson. Make prompt appropriate correction should the stall warning occur. This maneuver is demonstrated normally in configuration related to takeoff, climbs, descents, approaches to landings, and go-arounds. So we have, in slow flight, we can have high power situation, like takeoff and climbs. We'll be at a high angle of attack in slow flight, like takeoff and climbs. A descent, you'll be at a low power setting, and you could be flying it slow, say on a final approach as you're coming to land. Of course, landings are definitely a slow flight situation. Full flaps, power's minimal, but we're not at a high angle of attack. But whenever you get close to the runway and you go to flare, that is a point where you'll be at a high angle of attack. Go-arounds, this is a spot that slow flight could definitely help you out. You need to stay above the runway to get your airspeed back or whatever. You need to know how to handle the airplane while it's going slow. You just applied full power to go around. So you need to know how the airplane's going to handle and react. And lastly, with the objective, it's fun to fly in slow flight. Sightseeing is amazing doing slow flight, and especially 4th of July. Being able to fly around slow and watch fireworks is very nice. Alrighty, private pilot standards. We got to maintain a specific altitude, plus or minus 100 feet. So if you're at 3,000, you have 3,100 feet or 2,900 feet to be able to do this maneuver within. Holding a specified heading, let's say we've got 090 on the heading indicator. If we are flying straight and level, we have to maintain plus or minus 10 degrees either side of that 90 in order to pass this section of the private pilot testing. Hold your airspeed for slow flight. 55 knots is where we'll be setting up and starting this maneuver. You have plus 10, so up to 65 knots on the airspeed. You have negative 0 knots. So you have no room for air for going below because the stall horn can and would sound. Bank angle not to exceed 20 degrees of bank. This is not a maneuver where we're trying to fly like Maverick in a F-14 Tomcat. We are just putting along and we want to, circle around. No more than 20 degrees of bank. If an examiner gives you, or a chief, gives you give me a 10-degree bank, you have plus or minus 10 degrees on that bank angle per the ACS. Alrighty, set up. Minimum 1,500 feet above the ground for this maneuver. This is not something that I would attempt with a student 1,500 feet above the ground. There's too much that could possibly go wrong, especially with a stall. And it's just not feasible to do it at that altitude. Minimum example for the Eastman area would be 1,800 feet MSL. We won't be doing that this maneuver at that altitude. Altitude for maneuver 3,000 feet is MSL in the Eastman area is what we'll aim to do this at, unless we have other airplanes in the that quadrant per the board. Then we may have to change if someone's already out there. We may go up to 4,500, 4,000, 5,000, 5,500, just whatever we need to be able to get this maneuver complete. Pre-maneuver checklist. We have that here. Alrighty, so pre-maneuver checklist needs to be done every time for a maneuver and turned off and reversed. So we're setting up to do this maneuver. We need to do the pre-maneuver checklist. Power 2,400 RPM. Mixtures full rich. Fuel pump on. Heading and altitude bugged as required. That way, whenever you go to do this maneuver, you've already got your altitude bugged and you have a heading to start on, unless you are giving another heading. Clearing turns. Clearing turns. Got to do them. Every maneuver. So we're going to turn 90 degrees to the right, 90 degrees to the left. And we're going to make sure the area is clear before we start playing with this airplane. Area clear. What altitude are you at? Is there any terrain in that area? Other traffic? Towers? No, just north of Cochrane a bit, there's a pretty large tower out that way. So if we are lower than 3,000 feet with doing slow flight, which we should not be, that needs to be checked, most definitely. Alrighty, the maneuver and setting up. At a specified altitude and heading, begin to slow the aircraft below maximum flaps extended, 102 knots VFE, by pulling the power to 1,700 RPMs and pitching up to maintain altitude. So if we just stay there level flight and we pull the power, we're going to start losing altitude. Unless we're pitching up, we have to pitch up to maintain that altitude. Once we're below VFE, we can start adding in flaps in a controlled manner, 1 notch at a time. At every 10 to 15 knots below 102, add a notch of flaps. That way we have good control. We're feeling the airplane, letting it stabilize as we're adding in those notches, and we'll get a good handling as the flaps are input. And the knots will vary per student and per experience. Once all the flaps are added, airspeed should be between 55 and 70 knots indicated. If you're at 55 knots, you need to get that power back in there instantly. Would probably even start working that power back in probably about 60 or 65. That way you can get things set up. Trim. Trim is your best friend during this slow flight maneuver. Once the aircraft is stable at 55, go ahead and trim. Give some nose up trim to relieve that back pressure that you're having to put in on the yoke. And get that trim to set so that you have the altitude and airspeed held for this maneuver. It'll relieve the stress. We'll have that altitude already bugged because that was part of our pre-maneuver checklist. Heading already bugged, but if it's not, or you were given a different one, go ahead and bug it. And remember, you only have plus or minus 10 degrees on that heading indicator, and as well with the speed, you only have plus 10 knots, minus 0. All right, during this maneuver, you'll need to hold that altitude. The standards for private pilot, maintain that 55 knots. And we're just going to fly along slowly at 55 knots. Airspeed below VS could result in the stall horn sounding. Further to neglect and the correction could result in a power off stall. So we're already slow. Not going to get into the power off stall aspect, but we're already slow. We're at a high angle of attack, just like you would be in a power off stall situation. And if you don't have enough power in there to hold your altitude, you can stall, just like in a power off stall. You'll need to be coordinated. Need to know that you need to maintain coordinated flight with the control input on both the yoke for bank and pitch and rudder for the yaw. Maintain the alignment with visual reference outside if you had one. If you were able to find one, there's typically some good things around here to use. And fly that heading within plus or minus 10. Pitch for airspeed, power for altitude. The law of the sky for performing this maneuver. Pitch for airspeed, power for altitude. Alright, during this maneuver continued. During this maneuver, you will be asked to accomplish straight and level flight, maybe a turn, maybe a climb, maybe a descent. These are all things that can be asked of you per the private pilot ACS. So we'll need to know how to do those and perform them correctly and not activate a stall warning horn. During the bank, any kind of bank that you are asked to give, it should not exceed 20 degrees. This is a medium shallow bank turn. Turn can be varied plus or minus 10 degrees of the specified bank. Power should be applied accordingly to maintain altitude, and airspeed should remain the same within your plus 10 minus none. So between 55 and 65 knots, your airspeed needs to be in that area while keeping the aircraft coordinated. So if you're doing this bank, gotta apply that rudder, maybe some pitch up to hold that altitude, and definitely gotta apply that power. During a climb, power should be adjusted to full while maintaining plus 10 minus 0 knots. So if you're asked to climb from 4,000 feet up to 4,500 feet, you're going to want to full power it and then pitch up to keep your airspeed. If it's accelerating very fast, give some more pitch. If you're a little bit above your airspeed and you see it start to, drop down, you could also use the vertical speed indicator on the G1000. It's going to be a little indicator right next to that altitude tape. If it starts showing a negative trend, need to relax that nose and get that air flowing back over and getting the speed back. During a descent, power should be decreased to achieve a descent while maintaining the airspeed. This isn't rip it to idle. You still got to maintain that airspeed, because if we rip it to idle and nose over, you could blow right through your airspeed and even maybe a 300-foot descent if that's where they wanted you to go. Like, say we were at 4,500 feet. We wanted to go down to 4,300 for some odd reason, or even 4,000. If you pull that power out, that nose drops, and we start descending. Granted, your flaps are going to help as a drag device, but you could blow right through 65, your plus 10, your 65 knots. And you could blow right through that altitude. So definitely needs to be a controlled descent. You don't need to be falling out the sky. You should note during this maneuver how the controls feel. They're going to feel mushy, non-responsive. So whenever you give a little bank, it's not going to do much. You're going to notice that you're going to be putting in extra bank. High power setting. If it's warm, yucky day, we could be almost max power with the airplane, maintaining altitude and airspeed, and we'll have the yawing tendency. So that spiraling slipstream coming around, hitting the tail, you'll need a little extra rudder in there. Recovering from slow flight. Recovering from slow flight requires a flow of procedures to return to normal flight. A lot of times during flight instruction, there could be a transition, so you don't necessarily go ahead and recover from slow flight. It's straight into a power off stop. I've had multiple scenarios of that happening. I think even my private pilot check ride, I had all right, from slow flight, let's go straight into a power off stall, because we're already set up for a power off stall. But the recovery process is when recovering, got to maintain that altitude still, maintain that heading, and the airspeed. All three of those have to be maintained when you start your recovery. When you start really getting into your recovery, power should be applied gradually, And now we're going to let the airspeed build. Now we are really wanting to get out of slow flight. So we're going to gradually apply that power, and we're going to slowly reduce the angle of attack, the pitch on the airplane. We're going to let that nose fall. And it should be adjusted so that you don't reach stall. So if you're holding it and just relaxing it lightly, you could possibly still reach a stall. If you jerk the controls back for whatever reason because you thought, oh, I let it forward too soon or too much, and you're realizing you're losing altitude, or an abrupt change in that flight control surface could result in the stall horn going off. But we're also still trying to maintain that altitude. So we still got to let that airspeed build up. So as we're relaxing, that airspeed will come in. So with that full power being gradually applied, we're also going to release one notch of flap. Now, in that, we're going to need to anticipate a little bit of loss of lift. So it's best to let the airplane build up some speed first and then let that notch out. That way, we don't lose any altitude. So once you've noticed a positive rate and flight's stable, airspeed's alive, altitude's good, we're not showing a negative trend on our altitude because we're nosed over, we should still actually have a nose up tendency here because we added what during the setup? We added a bunch of trim in to relieve that back pressure strain on us as the pilot. So we're going to have to take that back out. So you've been pushing nose over, holding it. So now we're going to release that trim, let that nose down trim come in to help us keep a nose down situation. And once you've got that all set up, now we're back to cruise. We have all of our flaps out, we have our trim set, our power's full, airspeed's alive, and our altitude's good. Now we can come back to 2400 RPM and the maneuver is complete. So now you go back to the cruise climb checklist. Flaps are up, fuel pump off, landing light off. And then you'll proceed to the next part of the flight lesson. Stalls in slow flight. Not really wanting to dive too much. I got a lot of information here. Biggest thing is it is possible. A stall is absolutely possible during slow flight because you are operating the airplane at a high angle of attack at a very low airspeed. When flying in slow flight, performing any control input is important to remain coordinated and smoothly make control inputs. Excessive control input, whether it be bank or some pitch, can affect the aerodynamic aspect and cause the stall horn to sound, in which you must reduce that control input, reduce the angle of attack, and add a bit of power to remove the stall horn. Inadequate response could result in further aggression into a power off stall, which is when the airplane is at a slow airspeed exceeds the critical angle of attack with the relative wind and the plane loses its lift. If this occurs, lower the nose, level the wings, apply full power, release the first notch of flaps. Once positive rate, remove the remaining flaps to recover fully from the stall and get back to your cruise climb flight configuration. Allowing this to happen during a check ride is an unfortunate result of a failure. Unfortunately, it is a not good situation that you could not perform slow flight, and pretty sure any DPE would fail you on that one. If the plane is uncoordinated, this is a not so good situation. Uncoordinated, then a spin could occur, in which you would want to release the back pressure, ailerons to neutral, power back to idle, rudder opposite the direction of the spin. Once out of the spin, remove the first notch of flaps, recover, start pitching up and remove that first notch of flaps. And once we notice the airspeed's alive and we can hold an altitude, we'll start removing those flaps, bring that power back in. Allowing this to happen could result in aircraft damage if the plane's not designed to do spins and it's an abrupt spin. You could possibly have some airframe damage, but it will result in failure on a check ride, especially if the plane's not designed for spins. Common errors. Houston, we got a problem, right? Error. Failure to establish specified configurations. So we're not one aspect. We could be above 102 and you rip a notch flap in. That's failure to establish specified configuration per the airframe. Or you don't have all 3 notches in. You don't get your pre-maneuver checklist done. There are a huge combination of things. Airspeed is out of whack. Altitude is all over the place. Headings all over the place. And power is just way too much or way too little, and you don't notice it. Improper entry technique. Didn't do a clearing turn. You were given a heading to fly towards, and you just chose your own heading, I guess. That's an issue and a error that is commonly seen. Failure to establish and maintain specified airspeed. Obviously, we're doing this at VS, so we want to be between 55 and 65 knots. Aiming for 55 knots to get that slowest airspeed. Failure to maintain that is a common failure, getting too slow or going way too fast. Excessive variation in altitude and heading when a constant altitude and heading are specified. Kind of like I mentioned in the failure to establish a specified configuration. You know, your heading's all over the place. You're not flying the proper heading. Your altitude is not what the examiner or a chief asked it to be, and you didn't go to it, or you've just, not been able to hold it. That's an issue. Uncoordinated use of flight controls. That's where if we're going to turn to the left, need to keep that rudder in line as well. Step on the ball. Make sure you're getting the rudder in there. Proper correction for torque effect. So high power setting. Plane prop spinning to the right, engine's torquing to the left, which causes the airplane to torque to the left. Need to counteract that. Also, you've got with the high power setting, you got the slipstream. So it's impacting the left of the tail. Need to put that right rudder in there. Improper trim technique. Improper trim technique is just going to be put in the trim. Don't sit there and kill yourself with all this back pressure. Improper removal of hand from throttles. You don't remove your hand from the throttle because you are in slow flight. If you are sitting there having to use 2 hands, you have not trimmed properly, and the plane doesn't require a lot. It's a very stable plane and easy to fly. You should be able to use 2 fingers, a pinch grip on the yoke, and it'll do what you want it to do, especially if you have it trimmed out properly. It'll move back into the way that you need it to. Unintentional stalls, like we went over. You are flying at VS. With flying at VS, it's right there at the stall. So make sure you're keeping your airspeed up and holding that altitude and adjusting the power properly. Failure to adequately clear the area. 90-90. Get it done. It's part of the pre-maneuver checklist. Clearing turns is bullet point number 5. And that's going to be the end of it. That's going to be the end of the lesson for slow flight. Hope you enjoyed, learned something, and we will see you with the next lesson.
Move it, move it. I like to move it, move it.